Welcome to episode 8 of TLDR's World Leader Leaderboard. I'm joined today by Zach Michaelis.
Hello.
And Nadia Lovadino.
Hello.
We are going to go through our 3 sets of ups and downs this week. For the first time, I think a host will also be participating, which would be interesting. And yeah, without further ado, let's start with the winners of the week. All right, Nadia, hit us with your winner of the week.
So my winner of the week is US President Donald Trump. Obviously, he's been a big winner in the past recent weeks. Last week, he was inaugurated. And then this weekend, I think, marked one of his kind of first foreign policy wins over a key policy for him, which is immigration. So over the weekend, on Sunday night, he got into a bit of a tit-for-tat feud with the Colombian President Gustavo Petro. Essentially what happened is Petro but he essentially said that any flights carrying deported Colombian migrants from the US to Colombia can't land in Colombia. They can't be returned. And the reason being is he cited the kind of inhumane conditions that these migrants were being kept in. So like they were handcuffed and just being treated kind of like criminals. So he said, no, you're not landing. That prompted Trump then to go on X and threaten Colombia with 25% tariffs on all imports, to which Petro said, well, we're going to import you back. But in the end, what happened is I think the threat of tariffs kind of shook the Colombian government a bit. And within a few hours of like the initial dispute starting, the Colombian government came to a deal with Trump that these migrants can be returned to Colombia. And essentially, that's kind of when we're talking about Trump and his whole kind of migrant plan of like the deportation of like maybe 11 million migrants between 11
million
in like regioning countries. This is kind of maybe a big win for him, the fact that he was able to kind of threaten and not have to even follow through with the threats to kind of convince Colombia and probably maybe other nations in the future to follow through with his plans. So a win for him, I guess, in that sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, good example, I think. The first case of like Trump saying something, you know, kind of out there, but then not having to actually put it into force, but because people don't know what to expect from him. But do you think Gustavo Petro was too quick to give in? Because did I read at one point that Gustavo Petro was offering the Colombian presidential plane or something to...
I think there's some ambiguity over like what the precise sequencing is here, because the way I sort of originally read it was that Petro offered the presidential plane because his issue was actually not about accepting the deportees, but because of the conditions they're being kept in. So he offered the presidential plane and like this would be a nicer trip. Right. And then Trump said, no, you're definitely going to take them. And I think he was sort of saying, no, I'm going to take them, but I'm going to take them in nicer circumstances. And then the whole argument sort of fizzled out because it turns out that, yes, Colombia, Petro are taking them via the presidential plane, which is sort of, to my mind, what he offered originally. But either way, I still think it is a win for Trump, even if he was threatening them for no real reason. Because I think to understand why it's such a big win, you have to understand like how important the main issue for Trump's whole immigration plan has always been that it's hard to imagine original countries taking back these sort of deep deportees. And in some cases, you know, especially if you're sort of fleeing from a particularly poor country into the US, it just might be that your state doesn't have the capacity to take them back. I mean, Haiti's a good example of that, right? There are a lot of Haitian migrants at the moment in the US. Haiti's not really like a functioning state. You know, how do you send Haitians back to Haiti? There's no state to receive them. And obviously in cases like Colombia, there was always a sense that, well, they were just going to say no because they didn't want them back. And yeah, so I still think the fact that he's proven that with enough, I mean, again, leaving aside that question about the sequencing and what precisely went on in those negotiations, the fact that he's proven that actually he can force sort of like countries of origin to take those deportees back, I think that is a massive win for him because that is the main problem with his immigration plan.
Is very rapidly and with little back and forth as well. In this case,
one other thing is you said whether or not it will work for other countries. I think quite tellingly, this morning, China have actually said, because there's an increased number of sort of Chinese immigrants entering the US via the southern border recently. And that's always been a bit of an open question. You know, what do you do with the sort of like, I think it's in the tens of thousands, what do you do with the Chinese immigrants who are there, unauthorized immigrants in the US? And China has said that they will take them back. Despite the fact that Trump can't really threaten further tariffs on China. But yeah, I do think it's a big win because I think that is like the main hurdle to his entire immigration policy, and the fact that so far he's got a pretty good track record. Yeah, that's a big win for him.
How do you see this intersecting with US-Mexico relations in future?
Yeah, I mean that's obviously that's probably the big one, isn't it? Right, because I presume a plurality of unauthorized immigrants or undocumented immigrants inside the US are originally from Mexico, and you know, I don't know what the Mexican policy will be on that, and whether or not they'll be willing to take back, I mean, probably functionally millions of people if the deportation plan gets going in full swing. It'll probably be part of like a wider negotiation about US-Mexico relations. I mean, they have so many points of disagreement. You know, there's obviously tariffs, with Trump threatening Mexico and pretty massive tariffs. There's the question of the drug cartels in the northern part of Mexico. You know, Trump has talked about invading Mexico, a sort of soft invasion of Mexico, and some of his allies are clearly pretty keen on that. There's a question of rerouting trade or exports from China that I think Naja's talked about in a couple of videos via Mexico to essentially evade sanctions. There are so many points of tension in that relationship that this will probably be folded in to that like wider, you know what I mean, that wider ongoing conversation between Trump and Sheinbaum. And I guess whether or not Mexico accepts, or how many deportees Mexico accepts, probably depend on what concessions it can squeeze out on those other fronts.
Okay, moving on now, Zach. Who is your winner this week?
My winner of the week is Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni. I think there's nothing particularly that's happened really in this week necessarily. Apart from I would say that it turns out that Trump is going to be pretty bellicose and pretty hawkish with America's European allies. And I think that Meloni's relatively cozy relationship with both Trump and Musk is becoming more valuable as Trump's relationship with the rest of the EU strains. She's sort of the Trump whisperer. But the other thing I would say is I've been looking at the German election, and Friedrich Merz looks likely to be Germany's next chancellor. And I do think with the political paralysis in France, that sets the stage pretty nicely for a new engine of Europe in Germany and Italy, a sort of Merz-Meloni duo, because I think their politics look increasingly similar. There are disagreements over stuff like debt sharing, but Merz has positioned himself as a real immigration hawk. And I think that him and Meloni will take a similar tact on stuff like that, and also probably industrial policy.
That is fascinating.
Oh, thank you.
both of us going. Can you elaborate on that a bit more? Like, why do you think a new German-Italian engine could be the industrial?
I think we've always talked about this. So I think one of the okay. So I think set stage a little bit. I mean, something again that Naja's written about in videos is there is a bit of a leadership vacuum in Europe at the moment. You know, as much as I like to say that Macron is sort of filling it, at the moment he does look a little bit sort of stuck given the sort of domestic situation in French politics, and that has left a bit of a vacuum. And I mean, Italy has always wanted to play that role, but I think that it's always been squeezed out by the sort of like French-German duopoly. And I do think that now, as sort of Macron falls out of the picture a little bit, again, I think a lot depends on how French politics develops over the next like couple of years or so. But I think the main thing is just that, you know, Merz is going to win the upcoming federal election in Germany. And I do think there are places where Merz and Meloni overlap. So obviously I mentioned immigration. Merz has come out as a real hardline on immigration. I don't know if you guys noticed, but he said that he was going to permanently suspend Schengen in Germany. So close all of the Germany's borders with its neighboring European states. I mean, that undermines almost the entire European project. I mean, a temporary suspension of Schengen is one thing, but to permanently reintroduce border controls, that the whole single market starts falling apart, especially because Germany is the biggest country in Europe. But obviously, Meloni has always been pretty hard on immigration, and Merz will sort of follow her lead on that. She's more focused, obviously, on sort of the EU's external borders rather than its internal borders because of where Italy sits geographically. But nonetheless, there's an overlap there. The other thing is, I think people forget this in that Italy is, especially northern Italy, is a bit of an industrial powerhouse.
I was about to say.
And it's not an entirely different economy from Germany's, and especially that there'll be some shared anxieties about basically European deindustrialization and the competition that European industry faces from, I think, most obviously China, most directly China, but then also sort of subsidized protectionism inspired, well, basically subsidized American industry over in the US, where Trump and the Democrats, to a certain extent, have turned toward protectionism to try and rejuvenate American manufacturing. So I think that they will have similar priorities there. The other thing I'd say is actually Meloni has always been a green skeptic, and Merz is also a bit of a green skeptic, or at least he has signaled that he wants to put German economic growth over green concerns. He's sort of tacking to the right on that issue compared to where Merkel was. And so I think those three things, right? You've got immigration, you've got anxieties about European deindustrialization, and then you've also got anxieties about the green transition. I think that those are where the overlap is between those two politicians. And I think that could be the sort of base for a new Italian-German axis. Other thing is, I think Italy's influence in the EU is actually on the up, in part because of Mario Draghi, who next week, or this week actually, the Commission are due to release their their roadmap for implementing the Draghi report, which came out at the end of last year.
Right.
I think that has sort of quietly increased Italian influence within the EU.
Nadia, given that you pitched and wrote the piece about Europe's lack of leadership, what do you think about this idea of a German-Italian industrial engine? And do you think Merz and Meloni, or one of them over the other, could be the new biggest leader?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is. I think the whole kind of Franco-German relationship has been very strained. I mean, it's always been strained here and there, but recently there's just, together, they cannot exert the amount of influence that they could have done a few years ago, a few decades ago. And it's definitely been opening up a space, and a bit of this rift between them is definitely giving, creating a bit of a void that Italy is in a very good position, what Meloni specifically, to fill in. I do think, kind of from what I understand, a lot depends on, so like Zach said, Meloni has been really good at exerting the soft power kind of influence as well, with policies on immigration. She's influenced the EU a lot on all that. She's also kind of been aiding the Ursula von der Leyen with creating migration pacts in Northern African countries, and then with Albania, they've just signed off like a new massive energy deal with Albania. So that she's definitely put her foot in, and she's making this influence. But I think a lot depends on Italy's economy and the whole kind of reindustrialization of Italy's economy. I think right now, Zach can completely correct me on this, but from what I understand is that the reason why Italy has been able to kind of swim so far is a lot to do with debt. And
no, you're completely right.
But I do think a lot will depend on how much Meloni can push that kind of manufacturing and the industrialization side of things, and if she manages to kind of boost the economy a bit more instead of just kind of swimming through.
Just staying afloat.
Staying afloat, that's it. Then I think there's a really big chance then that Meloni and Merz would be able to kind of, couple up and be, well, not couple up, but be
Couple up.
leading the EU on certain issues in the future. Yeah.
That would be such a good story.
R.I.P. Elon Musk. I like this idea, and I think it's a good call. I could see that becoming the new, kind of power duo almost of the EU. And I think what Meloni is well placed to come forward and partner up with another big industrial nation like Germany. I think largely because she's also done a good job of avoiding some of the controversies of other very socially or culturally right-wing leaders in Europe, which have alienated those parties. Brothers of Italy isn't in the same kind of category as the AFD in terms of really hard, cordon sanitaires against
Well, the politics are
coalitions.
just different.
Yeah, and the politics are different.
Yeah.
And we always get a lot of comments about labeling everyone far right, but there are distinctions, between these different parties within Europe. And I think Brothers Vitaly, under Maloney's leadership, has done very well to avoid falling into some of the kind of scandals or traps that.
Sorry, Ricardo's arrived and it's definitely too loud.
Yeah, I was going to say, I completely agree with that. I think it's something I didn't really think about when I was just talking, but I do think that Merz and Maloney see themselves as quite similar politicians insofar as they both are sort of like reformed centre-right politicians who are sort of acting as firewalls, as sort of guardians against that more extremist, more radical far-right politics. Obviously in Germany, the CDU are sort of screening out the AFD, although that cordon sanitaire is fraying somewhat, it should be said. And the other thing is on sort of European questions, again, both of them, they are still fundamentally pro-European Union in a way that those more far-right parties aren't necessarily, or at least in lots of cases. And I think they both see themselves as sort of reformist Europeans, in that they both want the EU to survive, but they just want to reform it in certain directions and make it more politically sustainable. The last thing I'll say on the economy thing I think cuts in two directions. I mean, one, I think they do share an anxiety about European deindustrialization, and they probably will both want to use the sort of like might of the EU to protect their manufacturing industries. However, I do think there will be a tension on the question of European common debt, debt sharing. Italy has really benefited from, I can't remember, it's the RRF, I can't remember what that stands for, but it's the sort of European joint borrowing venture that has been distributed between EU member states to help them cope with the various crises that have afflicted the continent over the last couple of years. And Merz will probably be averse to further joint EU borrowing. And that's just a classic CDU position. And while he's suggested that he might be open to reform of the debt brake domestically, I think there's clearly little political appetite in Germany for debt sharing, given that I think a lot of the German electorate sees that as essentially Germany subsidizing Italian borrowing. So I think there's overlap, and then there's also tension on questions of the economy. Although I should say, one of the things I think is probably true and worth mentioning about the Italian economy is that tension between sort of countries like Germany, who saw themselves like economically strong, subsidizing weak economies like Italy. I think that binary is no longer quite so black and white, because obviously the German economy is in a really tough spot at the moment, and basically stagnant, 0% growth year on year. But actually the Italian economy is doing okay. I mean, it has a very high debt burden. I think that leaves it at risk of a sort of France-style crisis where an uptick in basically borrowing costs really squeezes the political space in that country. But according to most forecasts, Italy will enjoy sort of 1%, slightly more than 1% growth in the next couple of years. Inflation is low, below 2%. And while the debt to GDP ratio probably won't change over that much, it's not going up in the way that it used to. And so that might mellow some of that tension. The fact that the German economy is weaker than it once was, and the Italian economy is stronger than it once was. There's no longer that sort of like framing where some European states think that essentially the strong European economies are subsidizing the weak ones. Does that make sense a little bit?
Yeah.
Yeah, nice.
I'm sure it does. All right, moving on now to the third move on the board from my good self. So I guess, do I ask myself? Yeah, Georgina.
Yeah, I didn't have to do this, sorry. Do you want us to ask you?
Yeah, go on. Oh, drop my pen.
So, Georgina, who's your winner of the week?
Thanks for asking, Nadia. My winner of the week this week is UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer. This is largely because of the, I think, quite surprising phone call that he's had with US President Donald Trump, in which was described by Westminster sources as very warm, very personal, and Trump has told Keir Starmer that he thinks he's doing a very good job. They discussed the Gaza ceasefire. I think Starmer acknowledged Trump's role in making that happen as well. They talked about the economy, and Trump also offered his condolences for the death of Starmer's brother on Boxing Day. So Yeah, so very, very warm and personal, intimate phone call from the sounds of things. And I think this has surprised quite a few people. It's definitely surprised me, especially given that, you know, we've imagined Trump and Musk to be kind of two sides of the same coin, but Musk has said that Starmer should be in prison. He's implied that he was complicit in the rape of thousands of young girls. And now Trump is saying, actually, I really like this guy, you know, I like his country, and has also said that his first international trip abroad will be either to the UK or Saudi Arabia.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh,
So things are looking good for the US-UK special relationship.
That is a surprise, isn't it?
Yeah. So I think this is good for Starmer as well, in that we've seen Farage and Reform UK and also Badenoch and the Tories very much want to be in Trump's good books. And Starmer doesn't seem to have really done anything to have ingratiated himself with Trump. And yet for some reason, Trump is, you know, seems to be warming to him.
Yeah.
What do you guys think about?
Oh, yeah, sorry,
about
you're
this?
the host as well, so now you've got to ask questions.
I've got to
about
turn
your
it back.
own thing. No, do you have any thoughts?
Oof, not really. I mean, it is. I think that's crazy that between like it's the first state that he might visit might be either UK or Saudi Arabia, like two very different countries. But I mean, what you said about kind of Nigel Farage kind of, you know, bootlicking Trump a bit, and Starmer just like I think just sitting in Downing Street and just not doing much, but still being able to appease Trump and getting his good books is very interesting. And also that whole thing you mentioned about perhaps Trump undermining kind of some of Elon Musk's comments and his reactions does kind of make Elon Musk look even more like a bit of a, you know, little brat. Like, I don't know what, but like it is interesting that they've kind of put two different they're on two different stances on the issue of the UK, and I don't know whether that's gonna become a rift that's gonna become wider or not. We'll see. I mean, it's still early days, but it is interesting. What you mentioned.
Yeah, and on the Musk thing, I think there's actually there's some other evidence that I think that they're falling out a little bit. Trump, one of his first big moves was to withdraw all subsidies for electric vehicle manufacturers, which obviously that's Tesla. And then also Musk has been sort of shouting off on Twitter at the moment, or X rather. I don't think he is much of a truth social dude, but on X, because Trump has backed this what's called the Stargate initiative. Yeah, which is this like joint AI venture between OpenAI, Microsoft, and a couple of other people, which is supposed to sort of commit 500 billion to developing the first sort of, I think probably functionally the first AGI, artificial general intelligence, on American soil, essentially, which Musk is clearly not very happy about because this is his own AI venture, XAI, and he's sort of been staging a campaign against OpenAI CEO Sam Altman over on Twitter.
Yeah, he claimed that Sam Altman and OpenAI didn't have the money to put into this pot, whatever. Yeah, and I think there's a bit of an irony. I like this as a linguist, that this US-backed AI initiative is called Stargate, and Musk has Starlink and is all about space and stars and stuff, and yet he's the one who hasn't got it. Almost feels like a deliberate kind of
little jab at him.
Yeah, a little jab.
Yeah, I think so. I know we don't really do much. We're not really an AI channel, but on the AI thing, the other thing I think is quite interesting for Trump. Actually, no, this is not really about Starmer, but from the DeepSeek is the Chinese AI that's just come out that outperforms all of the sort of open AI models, and at a fraction of the cost. And I do think that's put quite a lot of pressure, not just on like the American AI companies, but actually on Trump, because so much of his sense of how the economy is doing is tied up with the stock market, and it's triggered a pretty steep downturn in the S&P 500. And I think that's one of those things where quite a lot of the bullishness about the American economy is driven by optimism about tech and AI. And I think if that fades slightly, I think Trump will actually genuinely really struggle. But yeah, on the Starmer thing, I was going to say one of the reasons I also think he's doing pretty well is I think if you sort of think back to a couple of weeks ago when there was the whole chaos in the bond markets that I know everyone loves talking about so much, the economic data looks slightly better for him now. I mean, basically borrowing costs have fallen, which is nice. I mean, it looks like in retrospect they were mainly just tracking American borrowing costs. But anyway, they've still fallen, which means that Reeves isn't going to have to do something funky at her next fiscal statement. And the IMF just came out with their forecast and they said that the UK would be the fastest growing European economy and the fastest growing in the G7 apart from the US, which is pretty good. I mean, I've no idea why they
Tables are
think
turning.
that, but there you go. It's nice.
Right.
Um,
Nice. So with that, let's move on now to the audience submission. With apologies to the person who suggested this and to Pope Francis himself, unfortunately, Pope Francis won't be making it onto our board this week. This is because we decided he's not going to get enough moves over time.
Yeah.
And, we want lots of movement on the board. However, if you're a fan of the Pope and his political engagements, you should prepare yourself for the next copy of Too Long, because
It's good.
I'm not giving anything away, but there's a chance that the Pope himself will get a feature. And he's not writing for it, but he'll be written about. Well, or will he? Buy the magazine and find out. So apologies there, but we've gone for the second most liked comment, which in this instance, I think it's been a long time coming, is Mette Frederiksen.
Oh,
The-
good.
I hope I got that right. Danes, tell me if I did or didn't. Who's a Danish prime minister. So what do we think about this?
Just quickly, we should also probably apologize a second time around, because I think this audience submission was
Same person.
the same person as last week, and you weren't here, but we refused.
It was the Greenland PM that time.
Oh, it was the
Oh.
Greenland PM. Oh, okay,
Yeah.
never mind.
Oh no! What you think it was the Pope again?
No,
No,
I
it
thought
was
it was
the same.
Mertz again.
No, it was the same. It was the
okay.
commenter who's the same, who keeps on. I think it's Cassandra.
Yeah,
Feels weird.
Cassandra.
Looking down the camera and saying someone's mentioning their name.
But we do
they-
see you and we appreciate you.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, Cassandra.
And sorry.
Okay, but back to Mette Frederiksen. What do we think? Up, down, neutral? What are we saying?
I mean, so what's the latest news on her is that basically she's had a call with Trump recently, and he kind of went at her again over the whole kind of Greenland situation. And I think her kind of tone was very much like, no need to panic, Denmark. No need to panic, EU. All right, everyone relax until something like actually, serious starts manifesting from these kind of threats from Trump about the whole Greenland debacle. There's no reason to panic, which I guess is great. It's good leadership from her. I think she's been very defiant in her kind of stance of things. And also, I think I read that she had talks with Marco Rubio as well over issues regarding Ukraine security and then the Arctic as well, and that the conversations they had were very fruitful. So, I think there's a lot of balancing going on between Trump, his administration, what can be done to avoid an invasion of Greenland. She's doing the best she can.
Crazy that we're talking
great.
about it. You know what I mean? I don't know. I think she's slightly mishandled it to my mind. I think she's come out. So Trump made the same suggestion back in 2019, and back then, I think she described it as like nonsense or something like that. Came out very, very strong. This time, I think in large part because it looks like Denmark will become independent relatively soon. She's instead
Denmark.
Greenland, yeah. She's instead focused on Greenland's autonomy. Said basically, Greenland can decide whatever it wants. Once it's independent, if it wants to become part of America, sure, and they vote for it, go for it. So I think she's been a little bit soft, and then also she's tried to sort of appeal to the Trump administration by stressing Denmark's value as an ally, and I just think that's always the wrong way to go about with Trump. Do you know what I mean? I think that it sounds weak to him. He's treating Denmark like a vassal state, and if your response is to go like, no, we've done what you asked before, he's just going to go like, well, yeah, exactly. I'm going to keep pushing you until you do what I ask again. And I think there was quite a funny moment when she announced another between 1.5 and $2 billion worth of investment in Greenland. And it included I think 2 new icebreaker ships, a couple more drones, but then it also included 2 more dog sled patrols. And then Trump on Air Force One was just taking the piss, and he was just being like, yeah, I mean, they can't do it. All they can offer them is more dogs, and I can offer you guys, I don't know, billions of dollars or whatever he's offering them. So I think in lots of ways she's misplayed her hand. I don't think that's how you respond to Trump. I think you have to do you have to be a bit stronger. But I also think that actually this is a massive mistake from Trump's perspective. I think he probably underestimates quite how badly it's going down with the rest of Europe. And, I think that in lots of ways, Americans, I don't want to get too much into this, but I think that there's a way of seeing this that if you sort of if you're an American politician and you look back over the past few hundred years, America has a long history of successful territorial expansion. But I think to sort of, America first sort of asked to buy Denmark in like 1867 and then asked on multiple occasions throughout the 19th and then 20th centuries. And I just think the world has changed a lot since then. Like, I understand if you sort of glance at a history book and think, oh, well, why don't we take Greenland? It looks pretty close, it would sort of fit nicely. We'd encircle Canada. But I think that it's such a violation of the basic principles of international law, and also just sort of modern norms and modern intuitions about self-determination and the right of states to, basically be independent if they so decide and make their own rules. That I just think it really undermines America's image, both in the international community and amongst its European allies.
It is insane.
Yeah.
Like that whole kind of just colonial revival and acting as if it's nothing. Like, we'll just take over.
Yeah, and we'll take over
this land,
Panama
as
and
if
then maybe
civil
Canada.
society, as if civil rights, civil
Yeah.
society hasn't developed in any way where people should have the right to self-determination and, control over
Their own territory.
their
Yeah,
own territory. It is insane the way it is just kind of like off the bat. I just brushed off make America great again.
I think that in terms of Frederickson's placement on the board, are you erring on the side of
I'm going
moving
down. I think she misplayed it.
I think I'm moving up.
You go up. I can be
Yeah.
outvoted. I'm happy to be.
Okay, I'll make my argument. You can argue me back. I think there's different ways to view how Frederickson's handled this, but I think if I'd be interested as well. I was looking for some national polling on Frederickson's approval rating. The last data I could find was from December 2024, and she had a net popularity rating of -13, which is bad, and she was pretty low down on the list of Danish politicians who were ranked. But I think, and please correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, I imagine this will make her more popular, I think, as a leader domestically and especially within Europe. I think if you enrage Trump by standing up to him, you're kind of doing something right. And the fact that he's as angry as he is about the fact that the Danish PM is standing up for Greenland and saying it's not for sale, I don't know. I think that shows solid leadership. I think she's also, in the past few days...
Isn't that the bare minimum? To
Yeah,
say
it is
that
the
my
bare
territory
minimum.
isn't for sale?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. I see what you mean. But I think that in the range of possible responses, this is like the softest possible response. I mean, the softest
Yeah,
possible response is to go, okay, fine, you can have Greenland. But that, you can't do that. I think, and this is
also
only marginally above that.
But there is an element of caution that you have to take, I think, as a world leader in this situation as well, where you want to show that you're not to be messed with, but you also don't want to enrage Trump to the point where he actually, slaps 25% tariffs on you or invades your sovereign territory or whatever it is.
I think
so. I think she seems to me like she's doing a good balancing act as well as she can to make her point, but also not enrage Trump too much. I don't know, but I think she's focusing on, the Nordic countries' collective security, European unity on this subject, and choosing not to focus too much on like the Greenland element of it. It's more like we've got to unite and stand up to Trump together kind of thing, which I think she's doing well.
Yeah, I think whether or not you think she goes up or down, I think fundamentally depends on what you think would have happened if she'd gone harder. And you might be right. If she'd told Trump basically, get out, what are you talking about? This is nonsense, go away.
I think he would have sent the ships straight away.
You maybe would have invaded, yeah. And that would have been quite an event. We would have been conscripted under Macron's army to fight for the EU. But my intuition is that I basically don't think he would have invaded, nor do I think he would have slapped massive tariffs on Denmark. I just think that would be sort of an international battle that he would lose. I mean, if you drew more attention to the sort of the battle over Greenland, I think international opinion would just go further and further against Trump. But I guess it depends on what you think he would do, because you're right, he's pretty unpredictable. Maybe he would slap 25% tariffs, in which case, well handled.
Well, we could compromise.
No, outvote me. It's good.
Should we have a vote?
Yeah.
3-person vote. I vote up.
Up.
Oh, Zach Michaelis outvoted on the podcast. That's crazy. Okay, so Meta
You're getting
Fredrickson's
sacked.
joining one above center. This brings us on to the next part, which is our losers of the week. Losers of the week. Let's start with Nadia.
Okay. So my loser of the week, and it's my second time moving him down, is Alexander Vucic. So I think this actually makes him right at the bottom of the world leaderboard, alongside leaders like South Korean, the former South Korean president, what's his name, Yoon Suk Yeol, which is maybe a bit too harsh, but my reason is essentially that he's facing an extraordinary amount of a complete loss of legitimacy himself and over his government, over his failure to meet student demands for the past 3 months, following the collapse of a canopy in the railway station in one of Serbia's northern cities. Just a quick recap: around, I think, 13 or 15 people died, and the protest kind of started as little gatherings, memorials for the victims, and it's now completely just outbursted into this massive energy and this massive kind of uprising across civil society, against not just against the regime. Their basic demands are essentially for people who were responsible for the tragedy to be convicted under the proper kind of persecution, which was over corruption and financial, all these kind of financial bits and bobs. There was a general strike on last Friday. They're planning a new general strike in the coming days. Today, a large part of the main motorway in Belgrade was completely blocked off. And essentially, just more and more people from civil society are joining these protests. It started mainly as students. And people were essentially scared of joining because there's a lot of fear of that if they do walk out, if they do join general strikes, they'll lose their jobs. There's a lot of intimidation in the entire, in society in general. But people are walking out, they are rising up, and it's a massive deal in Serbia right now. So he's moving down. Yeah.
Right to the bottom of the board.
Right to the bottom of the board.
Naughty Vucic.
Naughty.
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 Let's move on.
All right, yeah. Not too much discussion now because we're short for time. But Zach, who are you moving down this week?
Who am I moving down? I'm moving down Vladimir Putin. I am moving down Putin basically because of Trump. And I think that, in short, it turns out that Trump's Ukraine policy is a bit more pro-Ukraine than I think some people expected. I mean, not unequivocally pro-Ukraine. It does look like Ukraine has been covered in this latest freeze to foreign aid that Marco Rubio just announced. But in his sort of speech at Davos quite recently, Trump made it clear that he is going to continue supporting Ukraine until Russia comes to the negotiating table, and very much blamed Russia for the lack of peace talks, as well as asking the Saudis, which I do think is a very clever tactic, to help him bring down global oil prices to essentially bankrupt Russia while it's sort of financing its war in Ukraine. So that's why he is going down. I think he would have really been hoping that Trump would immediately abandon Ukraine upon coming to office, as he occasionally signaled he would during the campaign. And the fact that he hasn't, and has instead sort of turned on Putin, I think will be going down quite badly in the Kremlin.
Interesting. Another one to watch. Russia's economic woes continue to worsen.
And we will be doing endless videos on that over on
I'm sure you will.
And finally, Georgina, who are you moving down this week?
My loser this week is Ursula von der Leyen. This is because of pressure exerted on her by business people and other stakeholders in Davos, the World Economic Forum, in light of, given Trump's entry into the White House now, that there's a lot of pressure on her to scale back the EU's sustainability agenda. And this is bad news because Ursula von der Leyen made continuing the EU's sustainability agenda and supporting the Green Deal, one of her five pillars, or one of her main pillars of her
but
second
it's always
term.
been one of her main pillars.
It's always been one of her
Yeah.
main pillars, and it's pretty bad that she's getting so much
Yeah.
pushback on it now. I think people are emboldened by, Trump's very anti-climate agenda. And in fact, France's economy minister as well on the 20th of January sent a letter to Brussels asking for them to delay a new directive on corporate due diligence and sustainability reporting. And there's a lot of right-wing parties doing well in Europe at the moment, which have quite staunchly pro-deregulation, especially from an environmental perspective, policies. And I think this is, we've seen it with the farmers' protest before. Von der Leyen rolled back some of the pesticide rules and laws on diesel fuel. And I think this is ultimately going to push her the same way, and she will probably scale back some of the EU's green policies. That's my.
I think honestly that's such a good call, and I do think that the vibe shift has been so quick on green politics, because only last year when the European Parliament elections, sure, she watered down her Green New Deal, but she was still pretty ambitious. And the fact that it's already coming, even the watered down version is already coming under more pressure. I don't want to get too much of it, but I just want to say one thing, which is that I do think it's all a bit of a symptom of the fact that originally, and when it was first announced, sort of back in the mid-2010s, the Green New Deal, not just in Europe actually, but sort of variants of the Green New Deal in places like America and other developed economies, was sold as this sort of all-encompassing solution. It would be that we would make the green transition, we would re-industrialize Europe, and then we'd also create all these great green new jobs, you know what I mean, that are sort of like modeled on the industrial jobs of old, that are sort of dignified and well-paid and stable, and maybe just rejuvenate the economy as a whole. And I think that was always just it was just a bit ambitious. I just think that the green transition in lots of ways was always going to be difficult, and to pretend that it wasn't going to be difficult sort of only delayed political pain. The last thing I say as well is I think that Merz will make her job harder, because Merz is also clearly becoming a bit of a green skeptic, and as well as his positions on the Schengen area and probably his sort of aversion to further debt sharing, that will all make von der Leyen's job more difficult, despite the fact that they're actually from the same party.
Yeah, maybe former colleagues as well.
Yeah,
Sure.
I know it's going to be. There'll be a real irony if Merz is the one who sort of not scups the entire EU. I think that's too dramatic, but I mean, he will put almost plausibly an end to the single market if he really does permanently suspend Schengen. And there's a deep irony to the fact that obviously, like, Merkel made the current EU as we know it, and Helmut Kohl. Most of the European Union should be really credited to Helmut Kohl. Without him, and he was the CDU leader back in the 80s and 90s. Without him, you just wouldn't have the EU as you know it, and we might all be upended by another CDU politician.
Well,
history, crazy.
We shall see. We shall see. And with that, let's move on to the final part of the podcast now, our biggest winner and biggest loser this week. So biggest winners, let's rattle through this quickly. We've got Meloni, Trump, Keir Starmer, or Mette Frederiksen. Oh. So cast your vote, Nadia. Who's your biggest winner?
Oh God. I think, okay, I'll go for Starmer.
I was actually persuaded by Starmer as well. I think you made a good pitch there.
Yeah. You know what? I was surprised by my own pick, but okay. Well then, that is quite surprising. Keir Starmer now moves again off from neutral up into one above centre. Shock, horror. Okay, and our loser, biggest loser of the week, we've got Putin, Naughty Vucic, or Ursula von der Leyen.
Ooh. Who are you going to go for?
I'm going Vucic.
I'm actually also sold on Vucic.
Yeah, as am I, he's already on the bottom.
Oh,
so
no.
he gets, I think he gets a little wiggle, right? That's what Scarlett does. He gets a naughty wiggle on the bottom of the table.
Naughty wiggle doesn't sound good, does it?
And with that, that brings an end to
Lucky
this
you,
week's...
if you've stayed this long, you get to see Vucic's naughty wiggle. We should probably paywall.
So that's episode 8 of the Worldly Leaderboard. Closing thoughts. Have a great day, and comment. Who you want us to move next time. See you next week.
Nice. Very good.
Bye.